A thrill is born as engineers put a new twist into the roller coaster. Come for a spin on Scientific American Frontiers. Also, a dying baby gets a new heart. And an endangered woodpecker gets a new home. Can making a face change how we feel? And why doesn't this squirrel freeze solid? All coming up on Scientific American Frontiers.
GTE brings you more than the power of telecommunications, light, and precision materials. A grant from GTE also brings you the power of a new world in Scientific American Frontiers. At GTE, the power is on.
Hi, my name's Woody Flowers. I know that sounds like the name of a cartoon character, but it's easy to remember and it's always served me well. I'm actually a professor at MIT with a lot of curiosity about the world around me and how it works, which is why I'm standing here dressed like a skydiver. This new series is going to explore the frontiers of science, and I'm going to get to go along for the ride. I'm going to ask some questions, maybe answer a few, poke fun occasionally, and test some of the frontiers myself, which brings me back to the skydiving outfit. I've always wondered what it would be like to jump out of a plane. So I'm going to find out.
Make sure the head's up nice and high. Hard arch.
Fantastic. Oh, I hope you guys can hear me.
All right, give me a left turn, Woody. Give me a left turn.
Okay,
Left turn, left turn, left turn. Stop, left turn.
those are nice, swift turns. This is a 3D sports car. Here I come.
3, 2, 1, clear. All right, great. Good job, Woody.
Wow. I'm sure the guys with the cameras did a great job, but there's no way pictures can do justice to what I just experienced. I knew this was going to be a fun job. Actually, I spent a whole day training for this, and it cost several $100s. And even though the risk associated with the jump was probably less than that of driving out here this morning, it's pretty clear that skydiving's not for everybody. But a lot of people would like to get the kind of thrill that I just experienced without spending the time and the money and the nerve. And that's the reason that amusement parks are such big business. And that's the reason that the designers of rides are always trying to outdo one another. We wondered how you would design a ride that was both thrilling and safe. So we spent over a year tracking the design and testing of what is, at least for now, the world's ultimate roller coaster.
Three or four major roller coasters open up every year. And in a never-ending competition to be the best, each is bigger than the one before it. Today, coasters can be 20 stories tall and reach speeds of 70 miles an hour. The coasters are designed to be safe, but their intimidating looks are beginning to scare off less adventurous riders, according to the designer of this coaster, Ron Toomer.
I really think a lot of people are going to walk up to that thing and they're going to look up there and they're going to say, my gosh, that's too big for me. I'm not going to get on it.
So 5 years ago, Ron began toying with a brand new concept in coasters. Here's how all existing coasters work. The twists and turns and ups and downs in the track create forces pushing and pulling on the rider. That's what makes them fun. But always the greatest force is pushing car and rider against the track, even when you're upside down in a loop. And that's what keeps you from falling out.
The center pull holding
To
you
demonstrate, We joined a high school physics class as they rode a coaster with their own homemade force meters.
Force. This would mean that on your rear end, when you're in that car, you'd feel your normal weight. But as we go around the bottom of that curve, you're going to see this thing pull down to 2, 3, or 3.5 times your normal weight.
For the experiment, each student was supposed to look at and remember the force holding them into the car at different points in the ride. But it proved easier said than done.
Too scared to look at it.
We didn't look at it, we forgot.
Gotta do it again.
We made it easier for us to see by slowing down the action. Entering a loop, there's a force 3.5 times greater than normal gravity pushing them into their seats. Even when upside down at the top of the loop, they're being held into their seats by a force 2 times gravity. So at no point do they really feel as though they're upside down.
And you felt like you were on Earth rather than in a roller coaster upside down.
Didn't have a sensation of being upside down, except for the visual sensation of looking upside down. It felt like you were sitting right side up.
In all existing coasters, that's just as well. Otherwise, car and riders would fall off the track. Only briefly, at the crest of a hill, does a rider feel like he's coming out of his seat. But what if a coaster could be designed that did a barrel roll, like an aerobatics plane?
We're looking for an advancement of the roller coaster technology here that would allow us to feel more like that kind of a sensation. We're able to roll over, fly along upside down, and you really are upside down. You're hanging upside down, you look down, and there's nothing below you but the ground. There's no tracks, there's nothing there to hold you up.
It was this new twist in roller coaster design that Ron and his company, Aerodynamics, decided to explore. This is an early run of a quarter-scale model. To create the barrel roll effect, the car sits down in the tracks rather than on them, as in existing coasters. And to hold it up when it's upside down, it hangs from a second set of wheels. These are big innovations for a roller coaster. And when we joined Aero in the early stages of development, there were still plenty of questions to answer, like just how much initial energy the car would need to avoid the discomfort and embarrassment of a problem like this. The main task, though, was to stop people from falling out, the job of engineer Dahl Freeman.
Would you like to pull the restraint down now?
The challenge is to come up with a restraint system that holds people comfortably and securely, no matter what their shape or size.
Okay.
It feels great.
And you
really
feel more
secure.
secure hanging onto the handles.
If we're going upside down,
We're going upside down.
I'll hold on.
Ideally, the restraint system would be adjustable to fit each rider. But the time that would take between rides would make the roller coaster unprofitable. This system works well for Cindy, an average-sized woman. But Bill, who's a little larger, would clearly have some problems. The lap bar is meant to fit snugly across his legs.
Obviously, this is not going to restrain his body and offer the support that he needs when this vehicle turns on its side or goes upside down.
Bill can be accommodated only by shortening the lap bar so it can reach his lap. Now the system works fine for Bill.
Okay, how do you feel?
I feel really secure. You know, there's no place to go.
But can it still do a good job on someone Dusty's size? Aero's goal is to fit children 4 feet and taller. Dusty's 4 feet 4.
Pull that down so it's tight. Feel good?
Yeah, that feels
Feel
good.
locked in. Okay.
The shoulder restraint only keeps him from falling forward, so it's up to the lap bar to hold him in.
Good. Things feel okay here?
Yeah.
Okay, your legs are tight. You look like they're good and tight. Your arms, you're holding on a little bit here. Your head's clear. Okay. And you're off the seat just a few inches. Let's turn him back up.
Freeman is increasingly confident the system will hold riders as different in size as Bill and Dusty, comfortably and securely.
There's a partial compromise here. If I was setting it just for him, I'd probably move this lap bar in another 1 or 2 inches. But the way the seat is designed in the lap bar, we've got a range here where we can lock him in securely and as well deal with someone that probably weighs 4 or 5 times as much as he does.
Devising an effective restraint system was a problem they'd anticipated. But the first time they put a mock-up of an entire car on the track, there was a nasty surprise in store. Because the car sits down between the rails, when it goes through its barrel roll, the rear passengers are brought within a dangerous few inches of the track.
Boy, look at that.
It's pretty close.
You know, we haven't had to deal with this before, and that the tracks have always been pretty well under the vehicle, but this track's coming right up around as we go through the spiral. And we're going to have to do some shielding here, some more shielding than we normally do. One thing I don't want to do is close this in as a canopy. You know, we've got to keep the vehicle open to maintain the thrill of the ride.
But in the end, a small rear canopy is the only solution to making sure hair and hands don't get caught between wheels and track. At last, it's time to erect the test track, 1/4 of the finished ride. The joins must be precise to avoid dangerous lurches. But even the greatest care doesn't mean the coaster will run as predicted. While expected speeds and forces were all carefully calculated, they were based on assumptions about wheel friction. And this is the first time a coaster has alternated riding on top and bottom wheels. If the friction is less than expected, the coaster will run faster than planned, maybe dangerously so. Which is why the first passenger won't be a person, but a machine, an accelerometer. It's much like the students' homemade force meters, but it records front and back and side-to-side forces as well as up and down. 3 years after work began, the coaster is hoisted into position for its maiden voyage. The starting height is still something of a guess. If it's too low, the car may not pick up enough speed to make it around the track.
There's always that feeling inside, wonder what can happen that we don't know about yet, and maybe it'll end up just going back and forth right here in the dip and not make it all the way around or something like that.
The moment of truth. It looks like a perfect run, but were the forces recorded by the accelerometer in line with predictions? All seems to be well, even in the critical region under the line when the coaster is hanging upside down. So it's safe for a human rider. Who will it be?
Well, I don't ride them anymore. I get sick for one thing, and I don't like to go upside down for another, and it's just not my thing.
It's the engineers who'll take the first spin. After all, they built it.
We'll bring the lap bars down first. You'll have to tug on them a little bit to get the windows started. Okay, and then the windows go up. See that? Oh well. Strength next. You okay?
Yep. Keep your arms length.
All right.
This is a great. Have a nice ride.
I think we're gonna go.
From the sound of it, Arrows created the new thrill it was seeking.
This ride concept opens up a whole new dimension to us. And we can see, instead of the horizontal spirals, we can actually see a drop rolling. And we think that'd be wonderful. We see a high-speed spiral, just exciting things in our minds, and they've got to be developed and tested, but I can tell you right now they're going to work.
The first time the public will have a chance to try the new coaster is in 1992. I can hardly wait. Although, now that I've skydived and felt weightlessness for 50 seconds, even flipping upside down might seem a little tame. But I must admit that I'm not always going to be jumping out of airplanes as part of this job. After all, I still spend most of my time teaching design engineering at MIT. That means being in this office a lot. But what I hope is that my engineer's eyes are going to help in our explorations out there along the frontiers of science. There's so much to see. Stay tuned.
This is Colleen Barber. She's 2 weeks old. She and her mother are waiting for a heart.
Pretty girl. Yeah. You are.
Colleen's own heart is so badly deformed, she's only being kept alive by medication and a respirator. Her only hope for life is getting a new heart in a transplant operation.
The waiting is the hardest part. The not knowing what the outcome is. Just the ifs of the whole surgery, but this is her last chance, and we're going to give her that opportunity.
Dr. Leonard Bailey has pioneered infant heart transplants here at Southern California's Loma Linda Hospital. His work hit the headlines 5 years ago when he attempted, unsuccessfully, to transplant a baboon heart because of the acute shortage of donor hearts for newborns.
He's been waiting for about 3 weeks now.
These babies really don't have options. If we don't operate on them, they're going to die. And some of them will die in the next few hours, some will die in 2 or 3 weeks. So we search desperately for a donor to remedy that problem.
If Colleen is to live, another baby has to have died, and its parents agreed, in their grief, to donate its heart. Colleen's wait is over. A heart has been found. But even as she's prepped for surgery, the transplant team is worried. The donor heart may be too damaged to survive the transplant.
The donor had a long resuscitation in an effort to save that baby's life. That effort failed and the baby died, but the heart and other organs took quite a beating in the process. Had this donor been as far away as Texas or Kentucky, we would not have been able to use the heart. As it turns out, by keeping the amount of time to a minimum between donor and recipient, I think we're going to get away with it.
If Bailey is wrong, Colleen will die. She can survive only this one transplant attempt. The gamble begins with the removal of the heart from the donor baby. Weighing barely an ounce, it's the size of a walnut. Bailey must decide instantly whether it's healthy enough to transplant.
Had a little trauma. By and large, it's a good heart.
While waiting for Bailey's decision, the transplant team has been preparing Colleen to receive the heart. The process began several hours ago as bags of ice were used to chill her body. All her blood will be drained from her before the operation, and only if she's chilled to 30 degrees Fahrenheit below her normal temperature will her brain survive the hour or so the operation will take. Bailey carries the donor heart, itself chilled in ice water, from the donor operating room next door to Colleen's. With every moment, the heart is slowly dying. By now, Colleen's body temperature has been lowered to 64 degrees Fahrenheit.
All right, is the cooling even?
Cooling nicely, sir.
And Colleen's entire blood supply, just 8 ounces, is drained off. Even the slightest flow of blood would make the delicate cutting and stitching of arteries and veins impossible. The clamp isolates Colleen from her blood, and the surgery can begin. First, Colleen's own useless heart is removed.
Baby's about to be the best it's ever been.
The donor heart is made ready to stitch into place. Bailey connects it to Colleen's blood vessels, and then, slowly, her blood is returned. Now comes the critical moment. The ice bags are removed, allowing Colleen's body temperature to rise. Now it's up to Colleen.
Lungs are working.
But will the heart work in its new body? In case it needs a jolt to start it, electric paddles are standing by. But within moments, Colleen's new heart starts up by itself.
We were a little concerned about the donor, but the little donor heart seems to have recovered quite well so far.
So far is the key phrase in infant heart transplants, because the operation itself is only the beginning of Colleen and her new heart's attempt to live together.
Or actually, it looks remarkably good.
Already, 2 days after surgery, she's had to be resuscitated once when her new heart faltered.
Yeah, the heart rate has come down to like 190.
Well, we may get away with this marginal arrangement here, and I think recovery is possible. Baby Colleen was quite a challenge for us. She represented the outer margins, I think, of what we can do with transplantation, and pleasantly, she and her new heart have responded very well. I am very optimistic that she's going to be okay. Kind of anxious, actually, to see what she's going to look like when all this is done.
As with all transplant operations, the real barrier to success isn't the surgery, but how well Colleen and her new heart get on together. The constant danger is that Colleen's immune system, recognizing the heart as foreign tissue, will attempt to reject it. This is Garrick Tanner.
Time for your medicine.
He received his new heart 2 weeks ago, and every day since, his mother has been giving him small doses of an anti-rejection drug. He'll have to keep taking it every day for the rest of his life.
That's a good boy. That's a good boy.
So far, the drug's been doing its job, and today the hope is that Garrick will be going home.
Right. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay.
Well, good morning.
Hi there.
There's a big day for you.
I hope.
You actually going to take him home? How long has it been since his transplant?
Oh, it's been 2 weeks and 2 days.
So far, so good. But Garrick, like all transplant patients, is on a tightrope. The anti-rejection drug suppresses his immune system. Too much drug and he could die of a massive infection. Too little and his new heart will be rejected. An early warning of rejection is a fast heartbeat. Till now, it's been at about 115 beats per minute.
Well, the only thing presently that's a little bit of a glitch is his heart rate. He's been traditionally down in the teens and 20s. Mm-hmm. And here resting, he's about 130, which may not mean too much, but we'll keep an eye on that. He may be beginning an immune response towards his heart, and we'll try to make a judgment call on that.
Garrick won't be going home today. This is Amy Zuniga. She's been at home now for 6 months following a heart transplant operation at Loma Linda. And still, her mother checks her every day for signs she's rejecting her heart.
I'm very afraid that we won't be able to pick up that she's having a rejection, that I'll miss it, that I won't have been careful enough, or that I just, there'll be something that I'll miss, and that she'll, be in grave danger because of something I did.
This is a home video of Amy and her twin sister immediately after they were born.
Once she was delivered, they whisked her right away to the next room, and there they hooked her right up to some medication that would keep her heart functioning. They handed her back to us so that we could hold her and get to know her for a moment. And so for a brief moment, we were able to hold both babies together and enjoy that moment together. But it's like they tried to be very calm, but you could tell. I mean, we knew that they were waiting in the next room for Amy, and that once that she was born, that they were going to get right on her and make sure that she would be safe.
Amy's transplant went well, and ever since, her immune system has been balanced precariously between being suppressed enough to keep her heart, while potent enough to fight off infection. That such a balancing act is even possible is the most surprising and dramatic of the breakthroughs at Loma Linda's infant heart transplant program. It was a discovery made by the transplant team's immunologist, Dr. Sandra Nelson Canarella.
She take her medication pretty easily?
Yes, she does.
She doesn't fuss with it? We're so used to fighting the immune system in older individuals, constantly worrying whether they're going to get infected, or if we're too light on the immunosuppression, they're going to start to reject. Surprisingly and very pleasantly, we have found that the infants manage most of this themselves. They've kind of taken the job away from us.
The explanation seems to lie in the special immunological relationship that exists between mother and baby during pregnancy. Even though the fetus is foreign to the mother, each tolerates the other because of special cells produced by the fetus that damp down its immune response.
We're finding out that this state lingers on in the post-birth period for a period of anywhere from days to a few weeks. And we found that if we put a heart transplant in during that time, the immune response is caught off guard, and we can kind of slip it in almost unnoticed. It wants to protect it instead of killing it.
For baby Colleen, the battle to keep her new heart is just beginning. Little Garrick's rejection episode was soon controlled, and he'll be going home in a day or so. Amy Zuniga and her family have managed the delicate tuning of her immune system for 6 months now. For Colleen, Garrick, and Amy, their new hearts have meant new lives so far.
The hearts which Dr. Bailey transplants are about the size of this plum. Now they have to grow inside their new owner until they're about the size of my fist. I had a small research group that's been working on a new artificial leg for a long time, and we're not done yet, because the problem of designing a machine that mimics part of a normal body is very difficult, even when you don't worry about the problem of having it grow with its user. So artificial hearts are not the solution to the shortage of donor hearts for infants. That means that of the 3,000 or so babies that are born each year that need a new heart, only a lucky few will get one. Now, so far, the program at Loma Linda has given new lives to almost 60 babies. The oldest will soon celebrate his 5th birthday. So far, so good.
In the summer of 1989, the Francis Marion National Forest in South Carolina was a haven for one of America's rarest birds, the red-cockaded woodpecker. The woodpecker is an endangered species because old-growth pine forests like this, once common in the South, are themselves disappearing. The Francis Marion National Forest was special because here the population of the red-cockaded woodpecker was actually on the increase. Then came the night of September 21st. 1989's killer Hurricane Hugo struck South Carolina with almost unparalleled fury, record-high seas and 150-mile-an-hour winds. Watching the news reports with mounting horror was ornithologist Jerry Jackson.
I was keeping a very close eye on where it was headed. I had been on the Francis Marion National Forest only about 2 weeks before the hurricane hit, and I knew what was in store, and it was a disaster. I mean, absolute disaster.
In just a few hours, most of the Francis Marion was leveled. Of the forest's 1,700 red-cockaded woodpeckers, 1,000 were dead or missing. Many trees snapped where the woodpeckers had drilled their holes, crushing the birds sheltering inside. It's this destruction of the woodpeckers' homes, even more than the loss of the birds themselves, that was the most devastating of Hugo's blows to the species. Because the red-cockaded woodpecker's home is definitely not just a hole in a tree. To find out why the red-cockaded woodpecker's nest is so special, Frontiers came here to Mississippi's Noxubee Wildlife Refuge. It's early in the morning, the best time to catch a woodpecker. Noxubee, another of the few scattered old-growth pine forests of the South, currently is home to just 41 woodpeckers. White bands mark trees with woodpecker holes. The question for Jerry Jackson is whether the bird in this tree is sleeping late.
Hey, we got one.
If this is a female, then she's the only one at home. That's because males and females keep separate living quarters, and it's the father who nests with the babies, while the mother sleeps off by herself.
Oh, this is a bird that has bands on it, so we've got a recapture. We'll be able to tell how old this bird is and when it was banded.
And its sex, because only the males have the red cockade.
They only show these red cockades when the birds are aggressive or courting, and this bird's a little aggressive right now because he doesn't really like being caught.
Because it's a male, there are probably babies in the tree, and their hungry cheeps give them away. Both male and female share the feeding chores during the day.
Well, get back to your nest, fella.
So here's the first reason the holes are valuable. Each family needs 2. The second reason is visible around the hole itself. Sticky sap, looking like candle wax. The sap is there because, unlike other woodpeckers, red-cockaded woodpeckers choose to make their holes in live trees, not dead ones. And making a hole in a living tree is hard, very hard.
The average length of time that it takes for a red-cockaded woodpecker to excavate a cavity is 4.7 years. As a result, those cavities are extremely valuable pieces of property, and they're passed down from generation to generation, and the males inherit them.
4.7 years' work per cavity is quite a mortgage to pay off, and it raises the question, why? Why do red-cockaded woodpeckers drill through live sapwood, while other woodpeckers just peck their way through dead wood? And here's the answer: the gray rat snake. It's a superb tree climber, its scales giving it an excellent grip on the bark. But around the nest hole, the woodpecker has pecked the bark to keep the sap flowing. As the snake approaches its goal, a succulent meal of eggs or nestlings, the waxy sap gets thicker and thicker. The sap works its way between the snake's scales, sticking them together. But if the sap protects against snakes, it doesn't keep biologists away. Fortunately, Jerry Jackson's motives for climbing the tree are more benevolent. While the parents are away gathering food, Jerry plans to check on the nestlings.
Hey, we got one.
This is a 3-week-old female. She's banded, then weighed, during which she gets her first real look at the world she'll soon be joining. Jackson's work is part of a detailed monitoring of the birds here in Noxubee from birth to death.
That about has it, 45.3 grams. This bird is very close to fledging. You can see that it has very well-developed wing feathers, but that the wing feathers are still growing. And those feathers will be completely grown out probably within the next week, and this bird will be out of the nest by then.
Out of the nest and needing one of her own. Her home nest will be inherited by a brother. Fortunately, in Noxubee, there are still a few trees to be drilled, a few homes to be had. But back in the Francis Marion National Forest, Hurricane Hugo crushed hundreds of woodpecker homes. With so many trees destroyed, ironically snapped in two often because they contained woodpecker holes, the shortage of homes is acute. And because it takes so long to make new cavities, wildlife managers here feared that the 700 birds surviving the hurricane would die homeless. So in the spring of 1990, they went into the construction business. Biologist Carolyn Batchelor first drills a horizontal hole, just as the bird does. Then she drills a second hole at an angle from above to create a vertical cavity down through the middle of the tree. The idea is to reproduce in a few hours what it takes a bird over 4.5 years to make.
Here's the entrance here, and it's about 9 or 10 inches deep. The light-colored wood here is sapwood, and it is living wood, and the resin actively flows through it. The reddish-colored wood here is heartwood, and it is essentially dead. There's no resin movement through it. The bird needs the heartwood into which to put its cavity so that it doesn't have to contend with resin within its cavity.
Carolyn Batchelor scrapes off some bark to set the sap flowing. The tree is in move-in condition, but it took half a day's work. Here's a prefab option. This time, the tree is excavated by chainsaw. A little putty and a birdhouse is slipped into place. Even sap holes are started for the hoped-for tenants, and a little paint gives the impression that the sap is already flowing. In all, over 600 artificial cavities were built in the Francis Marion Forest over the winter. With spring and nesting season came the chance to find out if they worked. Eddie Taylor checks one of the birdhouse implants with a light and a dentist's mirror.
Bob, we got some eggs.
Is that right? How many?
Got 2.
That's super. That's the very first nest.
The same nest 3 weeks later, and hungry chirping signals that the eggs have hatched.
What I'm going to do is fixing to pull the nestlings out of the nest so that we can band them. What I'm going to use is this little instrument right here. Makes little nooses, and then I pull it tight, and it'll grab them, and I pull them out gently. It doesn't hurt the young because their bones have not calcified at this age, and so they're still malleable, and we can handle them gently without hurting them.
The chicks' eyes aren't open yet, but they can tell the difference between light and dark. And dark means their hole is covered by mom or dad arriving with food. At least that's usually how it is. A nest-by-nest inspection of the trees that remain in the Francis Marion National Forest this spring showed that 65% of all the new birds were born in the artificial cavities. A band on the bird will help keep track of it in the future. The man-made nests appear to have given the woodpeckers here a new lease on life. But even as this most important population of red-cockaded woodpeckers has been rescued from a rare natural disaster, the erosion of their habitat all over the South continues. The real threat to the species' survival remains man, not nature.
There's a lesson to be learned from Hurricane Hugo, and we're very fortunate we have the opportunity to learn that lesson. And that lesson is that every population is important, and that we can't count on having a few large populations. This is probably the best known woodpecker in the world. We know what it requires. We know what it needs. We just got to make up our minds to do what it needs to protect the remaining populations.
It's lunchtime in the city, a great time and place for people watching. It's a lovely day. There's just about any kind of food available, and the company's congenial. And judging from people's faces, most folks are relaxed and happy. Now, we're pretty good at reading people's moods from their faces. When people are happy, they look happy. When people are sad, both their posture and their facial expression reflect that sadness. Now, I, for one, had always assumed that the feeling comes first and the facial expression follows. I'm happy, so I smile. I'm angry, so I frown. It's pretty obvious, right? Well, one thing scientists love to do is challenge the obvious.
What most people believe everyone sort of believes as a layperson, is that that the face expresses the emotion that already exists inside. And what I believe is that is backwards. That rather than the feeling coming first and then the expression, that first you have the expression, and the feeling of the expression as it's happening is what the feeling of an emotion is.
Dr. Jim Laird is a research psychologist at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. His experiments depend upon people being deceived. And part of the deception is that Laird should look like a laboratory scientist and use impressive equipment, even if it doesn't really work and its data are faked.
This machine used to measure physiological data years ago, but it's old and obsolete now. We use it now just because it looks like real science.
Beth is a student volunteer who doesn't know the electrodes, like the machine, are fake. She's been told they'll measure her face muscles as she sets them according to Laird's instructions.
Okay, great. Now, there's one other thing I should have mentioned. There's another source of error in our measurements, which is variations in mood. We all have these almost random moment-to-moment fluctuations in mood, which we don't pay attention to oftentimes, but in this case I want you to be, aware of those kind of changes, okay? Good. So that's it. All you have to do then is sit there and let the machine do the work.
It's these mood changes that Laird is really interested in. He gets Beth to move her face muscles one by one.
Narrow your eyes a little bit, and now I want you to contract the muscles along the center line of your nose by flaring your nostrils and pulling your
She's never told what expression to make, but eventually an expression of disgust is molded on her face.
So that's good. Now, look at this.
Beth thinks she'll be asked questions about this picture later, but it's all part of Jim Laird's elaborate charade. The real test comes when she fills in a questionnaire asking her what her mood was during the experiment. The answer? Disgusted.
Great. Now, for the next one, what I'd like you to do is to open your eyes wide.
Again, Beth is told to move her face bit by bit. Laird is trying to mold an expression of fear.
Eyes open wide, and let your mouth open, relax open a little. I know these are often hard. Just relax.
Beth's having problems because she doesn't know her face is meant to show fear, but she gets it in the end.
Hold it like that. Now look at this.
As well as a happy face.
Now look at this.
And a sad one.
Okay. Now look at this.
In every case, when she's asked how she felt during the test, the answer matches the face she's been wearing like a mask.
On this one, Kim, what I'd like you to do is to scoot to the front edge of your chair.
Jim Laird does a similar experiment molding people's postures.
Now turn your upper body toward the left. Good. Twisting a little at the waist, yep. And keep
Again, if coached into an exaggerated pose, the subject feels the appropriate emotion.
Forward and lean back.
So in all Laird's experiments, the feeling follows the facial or bodily expression of the feeling, not the other way around. In fact, he argues, what we call feelings are our interpretations of what our bodies and faces express.
The major premise of my work is that we are observers of ourselves in the same way that we're observers of others. That is, we don't have any special way of knowing about ourselves. Instead, we have to, in an unconscious way, observe ourselves. So that what we know about ourselves comes from essentially public activity.
If Laird is right, then appearing to feel something should generate the feeling itself. Testing that idea involves another deception.
I'm sure you know that ESP doesn't work, but we have some ideas about ways that might improve ESP performance. Kind of tuning exercises, in effect. First of all, could you lean forward and put your...
The ESP talk is a smokescreen for the real experiment.
And then what I'd like you to do is to gaze into each other's eyes for 2 minutes. You don't need to think about anything, and you shouldn't talk.
The idea for this experiment came when Laird saw two people in a cafeteria gazing into each other's eyes as if they were in love. These two subjects have never set eyes on each other before.
If you can get people to express an emotion, they will then feel the emotion. And in this case, gazing into someone's eyes is an expression of love. And so we're hoping they will then feel love.
After answering questions that included how they felt about each other, the subjects are told the real purpose of the experiment.
I was kind of surprised that the experiment was about emotions and gazing into people's eyes and seeing if that actually made you feel the emotion of love, because I kind of have to admit that I thought I did a little bit, and I thought maybe, it was just this person.
As I was filling out the questionnaire, most of the responses that I made about her were more on the positive side than on the negative side. Whether that means that it worked or not, I don't know, but there might be something to it.
If it all sounds a little too simple to be true, Jim Laird is the first to agree, but only, he argues, because feelings are complicated things.
The effect is consistent and real. It's not gigantic. I mean, it's not like these people leave the experiment enraptured forever. But then remember that we're only manipulating a tiny part of the real life pattern of love. I mean, when people are beginning to fall into love, they do all sorts of things. They touch, they look, they share confidences, the heart pounds, all of those things. And they must all contribute to the full-fledged feeling.
Early May, 250 miles inside the Arctic Circle. On the shores of frozen Lake Tuluc in Alaska, the first signs of spring. Nibbling at the melting tundra, the caribou have returned. Ptarmigan, too, have come back from a winter spent 500 miles to the south. But another creature just putting in his first appearance for the year has spent the whole winter right here, a few feet underground. Today he has a visitor. University of Alaska biologist Brian Barnes is trying to discover just how the Arctic ground squirrel makes it through the Arctic winter.
It's a long winter here. Begins to freeze in late August and stays cold like this into late May. We've measured soil temperatures here where the ground squirrels hibernate, and they drop to -10 to -20 degrees Celsius for much of that winter. And it's during that time that these animals stay curled in a ball underground in hibernation.
The problem for an animal as small as the ground squirrel is making the few ounces of fat it can put on in the brief Arctic summer last through 8 months of 20 degrees below. Brian Barnes and graduate student Mark Reed take advantage of the spring sunshine to check baited traps set out near ground squirrel burrows.
Yeah, we got one. Yeah, that's great. She looks in good shape. I think she's one we'll take back for our hibernation experiments.
This female will accompany them back to their lab in Fairbanks, where she'll have plenty of company in a room maintained at 5 degrees Celsius. Warm when compared to 20 degrees below, but cold enough to induce hibernation.
This fellow is in hibernation. You can tell by his curled posture and his piloerected hair. And this is the typical posture for a hibernator, with his nose tucked beneath his tail. He's very cold to the touch, I can tell. These animals, when they're awake, their hearts will beat 200, 250 times a minute. This fellow's heart, at its lowest frequency, will only be about 5 to 10 beats per minute. The breathing rate drops to, typically only 10 to 15 breaths in a row, and then an hour of no breathing, followed by another 10 to 15 breaths.
This drastic slowing down of the squirrel's system is like what occurs in other hibernating animals. But what's different about the squirrels is that they appear to let themselves get much colder than other creatures, here down close to the room temperature of the lab. They stay at this temperature for about 3 weeks, then slowly begin shivering. The shivering becomes more violent as they burn fat to warm themselves up. This one has been shivering for a couple of hours now. In a few more hours, it will be fully awake with a temperature of 37 degrees Celsius.
Once fully rewarmed, they remain that way for only about 10 hours, 12 hours, and then recool back to normal torpid levels. It takes about 2 days to recool.
This cycle of 3 weeks dormancy, followed by a few hours of shivering and a few more hours fully awake, is repeated some 10 times over the length of the winter. The lab environment has allowed Brian Barnes to watch his squirrels hibernate. But to answer the central question, how they survive months of temperatures far below that of the laboratory, he has to wait for winter. A few months earlier, he put several of the squirrels captured in Toolik out in large underground cages and let them dig their own hibernation burrows.
To determine what they're doing inside their burrows, we use these radio transmitters that are implanted inside their bodies and send out a signal that varies according to their body temperature. You can hear a high tone because the transmitter's been warmed with my body. But if I drop it into the ice water here, you can hear the tone slowly fall as the temperature of the transmitter falls. Well, from the low tone, you can tell that one's down, hibernating. Hibernating. He's really cold. Still colder. And there you have an aroused one, an awake one. That guy's really down.
Using this system, Brian Barnes made the astonishing discovery that unlike any other known warm-blooded animal, Arctic ground squirrels actually allow their body temperatures to drop below freezing.
Water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and our bodies are 70% water, and so are the squirrels. So you'd expect that as the squirrels' temperatures fell below freezing, that water within their cells and tissues would begin to crystallize into ice, and they'd suffer the lethal damage that frostbite and freezing can occur. In these squirrels, that doesn't happen. They drop to 30, 29, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, and no freezing occurs.
How do the squirrels do it? Barnes has tested blood plasma from the squirrels to check the most likely explanation, that the plasma contains an antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming in the blood. Some Arctic fish avoid freezing this way. But the squirrel's plasma behaves no differently than any other mammals, freezing just below 0 degrees Celsius.
So far, we've measured freezing points that are typical for mammals, around minus 0.6 degrees Celsius. So from this procedure, we've determined that there is no antifreeze in these ground squirrels, even though their body temperatures are below the freezing point.
In the lab, the squirrel's blood freezes. In the animal, it doesn't. Just now, there's no good explanation for how the squirrels allow their hibernation temperatures to drop below freezing. But the fact that they can means that they save a lot of energy over the winter, energy they'd otherwise be spending keeping warm. Without being able to go stone cold during hibernation, the Arctic ground squirrel just wouldn't be able to eat enough during the summer to survive the long freezing winter.
What a great mystery. The blood freezes in the lab, but not in the living squirrel. Now, Brian Barnes published his research a few months ago and suggested that the explanation might lie in a phenomenon called supercooling. Now, I've got a supercooling demonstration here. Rather than squirrel's blood, we've got tap water in this glass in the middle. And there's an ice water slurry around the outside, to which I've added quite a lot of salt. Now, the temperature of the slurry is now at minus 12 degrees Celsius. The tap water is still liquid, and its temperature is now minus 3 degrees Celsius. Now, that's 3 degrees below its freezing point. Now, this supercool state is quite unstable. The question is, can the squirrel's blood exist in that state for up to 3 weeks at a time? I must admit that I'm quite skeptical. For one thing, the squirrel's heart is beating, barely, and its blood is moving around in its body. Now, even the slightest motion, like this, causes the supercool liquid to freeze immediately. So, in my opinion, the mystery remains. And that's often the way it is on the frontiers of science. Every answer creates new questions. Join us next time, and we'll ask a few more.
GTE brings you more than the power of telecommunications, light, and precision materials. A grant from GTE also brings you the power of a new world in scientific American frontiers. At GTE, the power is on.